Okay. So again, we're going to look at the client server. All right. So next, so client server, we're going to look at Java and MySQL. JDBC, as described in the video, stands for Java Database Connectivity, similar to ODBC. It is not really as dependent on the class path now as it used to be. In many cases, you probably don't need to use it. The video points out some different ways of doing it. The first example, which is basic dynamic SQL, is bad. It's slow. It's vulnerable to hackers. It's vulnerable to something called SQL injection. So you really want to avoid that. Prepared statements are a much better way, and I do that a lot. Something called callable statements or stored procedures in the database are a very good option, and they're probably a best practice. And I don't think we're going to look. I actually have these two topics here. Dynamic SQL we want to avoid, and transaction processing I think I'm going to talk about later on. But we will get into a JSP or Java Server Pages example, and this is where you essentially mix Java commands with standard HTML commands. Environmental variables, I go through them. These really apply to Windows, and most of the stuff gets done automatically for you now when you install Java. It used to be that you had to manually set all these years ago. Don't really have to do that anymore. So this is not too applicable. You probably won't have any issues with these environmental variables anymore. If you do, you might have to go into Windows or whatever operating system you're using to set them. But I've used now Java on Windows, Mac, and Linux, and I haven't had to set any of these things in years. So you probably don't have to worry about that anymore. You can download the MySQL database driver. As far as I know, this is still the current one. I haven't looked to see if there's anything more current, but this will work with all our examples. I think I did hear they were going to come out with a new one, a 5.5 driver or something. So you might want to look into that. This particular example here, uses dynamic SQL, and Java is a purely object-oriented language. So everything is what we call an object. And it starts with being a class. A class is like a blueprint for an object that's constructed. And again, most of you, I think, probably had to take... Did you have to take 254 as a prerequisite for this class? I think you did. So you all should have been exposed to this stuff already anyway. They probably did not cover any JDBC stuff in your 254 class unless you took it with me, because I typically do. If you took 254 with me, this is probably all reviewed to you, I hope. So you should know what an import in Java is, right? Is there anyone that did not take 254 or a Java class at some point? I don't think I checked. Okay. So I'm going to assume you've all taken it. Okay, we got one person that did not take it. I'm not taking it. Two people that have not taken it. And because I know we did get the prerequisite waived for a couple of you, but did you have another programming language like C++ or JavaScript or... Well, the good news is that the client-server stuff is not actually going to be on the final. So, if you want to ignore this, you probably could. You're not going to be asked... You might be asked a very high-level question, but nothing technical. Yeah, so I know a number of you probably had some, something else, object-oriented programming and stuff like that, and that's fine. So you understand what objects are, methods, and stuff like that if you've had C++ or PHP and JavaScript and stuff like that. Well, Java in general, you might find it too hard, but specifically, if you're pursuing some sort of certificate at College of San Mateo, you generally do have to take the Java class at some point. What we're showing here is a little more advanced. We're kind of jumping into the fire. If you've had a similar object-oriented language in the past, then you probably could follow along pretty easily between the video and tonight. But if you've never had any programming experience at all, it's going to be pretty tough to follow. The closest you've probably had so far is what we've done with stored procedures. But Java is a little more technical than that. So anyway, there's the video, and this will be back up there as well. Yeah. Well, if you're kind of bad at programming, then you probably want to look more in a less technical area. Um, you can still stay within IT. Actually, the less technical aspects of IT are less likely to be outsourced. So you may not want to go to a real technical area these days. Um, Although I think that's already showing signs of turning around, by the way. Um, all right. So anyway, let's continue with this. So you have to this Java.SQL is the library that contains everything. This is an import. If you come from a C++ world, this would be like a pound include. Although Java does not have a preprocessor, so we don't we do it differently. But it's essentially the equivalent of an include file, or PHP and include once, um, uh, or a script file in JavaScript. It's a library of SQL commands. Public class, I'm sure you're used to that from C++. PHP has that capability with 5 now, to be object-oriented. Main method is the startup of every Java program, just like the main function in C++. And this is a method that is being called, list customers is being called from here. And it's passing in something called a URL, which really just, basically, this is the Universal Resource Locator that explains to JDBC, which is generic, which database it's going to be using, where that database is located at the server, the port to talk to it through, or the door, sort of, and which database to use. So the URL has quite a bit of information that Java needs to connect to that database. It needs a few more things, and we'll look at it. All of these here are JDBC classes that are included with Java.SQL. Make a connection to the database, execute some sort of statement. This driver manager.register driver loads the MySQL driver into memory, and this driver comes from this download right here. Right, so this download is what provides that. Okay. And all right. We can then get a connection using the URL. And these two null values here are where you would normally put the username and then the password. And the reason that they're null is because MySQL's default login doesn't require a username and password. In most other cases, particularly if it's some sort of production live database application, you certainly would have a username and password. It would be insanity not to. And then we create a statement. We use a very simple select statement to query information from that table. Execute the query, and the result set is like a cursor, or if you think of it as a little sort of table or Excel worksheet, it's got rows and columns, and then we will use a while loop to loop through it, just like the videos should have shown. And then finally, we're going to use a loop, and we're going to use print statements to output each column in the query. So 1 is this first column right here, customer number, and its data type is an int. Then 2 and 3 are name, last name and first name in strings. Catch. Those of you that are familiar with C++, PHP, even JavaScript, probably know about try-catch blocks. And then finally, area is where we shut down all of our connections to the database nicely so that we don't cause any corruption. And of course, running this, let's see if I go enter. Let's just do it here. Let's copy and paste it using Notepad. And come back here. Should be able to compile it. taking a while to run, to compile. Okay, we're done. And then we just run it. Okay, it looks like there's no data in the customer table. So let's just see. This is star from customer. And there's no data. So that doesn't work too much. I'm just going to put the data we need in there. That should be an auto increment. So last name, first name, values, Adams, John. Okay, that's enough. Let's quit out of here and run the Java program again. And now we get all three. So Java queried our database and printed it out. Okay, and that was on the videos as well that you could have watched. I went through it a little quicker than the videos because you should have already seen it. Just wanted to review it real quick. Is there any questions on that one?